recently received a message from a viewer who reached out with some great questions about using the HX Stomp for bass, covering things like how would you use it to replace a traditional amp and cab setup live, and how about using full range flat frequency response speakers or FRFR speakers, and how would you send a DI signal to the front of house directly from the HX Stomp. I thought the questions were really relevant to a lot of players out there, so rather than just replying directly, I wanted to share my responses with you all in this video. Hopefully it sparks some discussion and helps anyone else who's navigating a similar setup. I've included the original questions in full in the video description for reference, but will summarise them for the purpose of this video. I'll provide you with my thoughts in response to the full questions, but I also welcome you to share your experience and join in the discussion using the comments section below. My ultimate view is that ideally we would all play a high quality full tube amp via an SVT 8x10 cab. Most of the time, the sound, feel and tone we long for lies somewhere in this classic amp and cab setup. However, it's not an ideal solution for the working musician who shifts their own gear and often therefore needs portable and reliable equipment that still gives them great tone and is simple and quick to set up on a gig. Every choice we make, which departs from the classic tube amp and 8x10 cab setup, is a compromise in some form. What we need to do is find the right balance that works for us as a player. Can the HX Stomp fully replace a traditional bass amp and cab in a real-world live performance context? Yes, the HX Stomp can completely replace a traditional bass amp rig, but whether you'll be happy with the replacement might depend on which route you go down. If you're happy with your bass amp and cab sim sounds that you've created on the Stomp when monitoring using headphones or studio monitors, then there's only really one reason I can think of that would make those tones less satisfying live, and that would be if you couldn't reproduce the full frequency range on stage. To achieve that, you may require a full range flat frequency response speaker which is capable of delivering the full bass guitar spectrum. The problem is that although some powered FRFR speakers will do a solid job, few will give you true low-end depth like a dedicated bass cab unless you're spending quite a lot of money or adding a separate subwoofer. You may need to make small EQ adjustments for live use, since playing at volume can emphasise problem frequencies. But with the right monitoring, either good in-ear monitors or an FRFR monitor that's truly suitable for bass, this could be a perfectly workable solution. Also keep in mind that traditional PA monitor speakers usually don't cover the full bass range without a subwoofer, but they are used widely in live music venues and many ampless bassists monitor through them. It's not uncommon or unworkable, it's actually pretty standard. The main difference with an ampless setup versus a traditional setup is that your sound is no longer coming from behind you, but from in front, and therefore you do lose the feeling of a cab pushing air behind you. Whether that bothers you or not is a personal preference. I'd say that the HX Stomp or any modeler can't fully replicate the feel and dynamic response of a tube amp. It gets the sound right, but doesn't necessarily replicate the sensation of playing through one. That said, how many working bassists are actually using full tube amps on gigs these days? Not many. If your concern is whether it can replicate the sound of a modern Class D amp, then absolutely, yes. If you're happy with the tone in your headphones or studio monitors, there's no reason why you wouldn't be happy live, assuming your monitoring is full range and of decent quality. You just have to accept that the low-end response may not match a true bass cab unless you invest in a high-end FRFR speaker or pair it with a sub. The best thing to do before investing further would be to try running your HX Stomp into a PA desk and out through a passive monitor at gig volume to see if you're happy with the results. From there, you can decide whether to stick with just the Stomp and use whatever monitor is provided at venues, or even your own in-ear monitors, or invest in your own FRFR monitor so you have more control and a traditional backline feel. My cab, the barefaced Big Baby 3, happens to be full range and flat frequency response, so I can use it full range if needed, and it also has an adjustable high frequency control on the back, but it is an expensive cab. Should you push HX Stomp presets with amp and cab sims through a real amp? And can a powered FRFR speaker fully and faithfully deliver a bass tone in live situations without the need for a traditional bass cab? If you're using amp and cab sims in your HX Stomp presets, you ideally don't want to run these into a real amp's preamp. That would be like plugging into an amp and cab, then routing that signal back through another amp and cab, which just doesn't make sense and often doesn't sound right. As I explained in my previous video, I make two kinds of presets, ones with amp and cab sims for recording or ampless live setups, and ones without amp and cab sims solely for effects when using the Stomp on a traditional pedal board being plugged into a real amp and cab. That way, I'm not doubling up on tone shaping stages unnecessarily. With the 4-cable method, you'd still go through the amp's preamp, and that's fine if you're just using the Stomp for effects, but if you're using it for amp and cab sims too, it can conflict. A better alternative is to use the FX return of your amp to bypass its preamp entirely, allowing the HX Stomp's amp and cab sims to do the full tone shaping while the amp just acts as a power amp. The trade-off is that you lose the amp's EQ controls on stage, but again, it's all about balancing what matters most to you. I've already touched on this, but although some powered FRFRs will do a solid job, few offer the same deep low end as a real bass cab unless you're spending lots of money or using a sub. If you can, try out some options before committing. One alternative is to use a power amp and a bass cab, but then you're back to hauling more gear around, which may defeat the purpose. Personally, I use a Class D Ike T900 amp, which is very flat and transparent, and I pair this with the barefaced Big Baby 3 cab. This lets me run pedals and HX Stomp presets into it and get nearly the same sound that I'd hear in headphones or studio monitors. It has a tweeter that I can also adjust. That said, I don't usually run amp or cab sims when using this setup. I take a DI directly from the Jadfray Capo preamp pedal on my board instead. However, as my amp is transparent when set flat, and I have an FRFR cab, I could easily send presets that do use amp and cab sims via my rig, and they would sound extremely close to what you would hear via headphones or studio monitors. Can the HX Stomp be used directly as a DI into a mixing desk? And does it send a reliable, gig-ready signal without a dedicated DI box? Yes, you can send a balanced signal at either line or instrument level, depending on what the desk accepts, via a TRS to XLR cable from the HX Stomp. It's a great clean solution for live shows. The only limitation is that the HX Stomp doesn't have a ground lift, so if you do run into any hum issues, it's worth keeping a cheap passive DI box in your gig bag. You can get them from Behringer for about £20. That way you've always got a backup fix if needed. I hope this video provided some useful information to think about what might work best for you, but be sure to try things out where possible before making big purchases. Thanks for watching.